We are live.
Good evening, all. Good evening, all. I'm Utkarsh, the coordinator for communication and events at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, or FAS, as it is more commonly known as. On behalf of FAS, I welcome you all to this webinar on wage inequality in India. Please note that the session is being recorded and it will be made available on YouTube in the future. The webinar is the third discussion being organized by the Foundation in 2024 on aspects of rural policy in India. In February, we initiated these discussions, and our first webinar was Agriculture and Budgets in India, where Professor R. Ramkumar discussed some important questions pertaining to the trends of public spending on agriculture. Our second webinar, Costs and Incomes from Crop Production in India, happened in April 2024. Dr. Deepak Johnson presented some important findings from a report that the Foundation had released recently. Today, we are conducting the third of this series, and we hope to organize another discussion on some aspect of rural and agriculture policy in India in the near future. Now, before calling upon the moderator, let me take a few moments to talk about FAS. We are a research organization based in Bangalore, India, and set up in 2003 with the aim of facilitating multidisciplinary theoretical and empirical inquiry in the field of agrarian studies in India and other developing countries. One of the early and major initiatives of FAS was to start a series of village studies in different parts of the country so as to obtain good quality data on rural lives, including on incomes and problems of small farmers, on access to basic amenities, and so on. In these 2 decades, we have surveyed 27 villages located in different agroclimatic zones across 12 states in the country. Through these detailed surveys, we have created a unique and rich archive of primary data of the Indian countryside at the turn of the 21st century. Data that can be invaluable for young researchers, senior scholars, policymakers, and changemakers working at the grassroots level. Some of the findings based on this database can be found in the book series called Socioeconomic Survey Series. We have books on Rajasthan, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tripura, West Bengal, and a special journal issue on Bihar. But there's still a lot more to explore. Drawing on this unique data archive and follow-up studies, we have attempted to take up key questions of the rural economy, including the situation of Dalit households, the constraints of small farmers in India, issues in women's employment, and so on. We have also conducted research on the statistical systems required for effective local governance at the level of village panchayats. Many of these thematic studies conducted by FAS have been published under a book series called the Agrarian Studies series. The Foundation also publishes an internationally recognized peer-reviewed open access journal, Review of Agrarian Studies. The digital first journal carries theoretical and empirical articles on social, economic, historical, political, and scientific and technological aspects of agriculture and rural societies. FAS regularly organizes academic events, including podcasts, workshops, and seminars for young scholars, thematic conferences of international scale, and public lectures by eminent personalities to inform the discourse on rural transformation. In fact, we have recently released a call for applications for the third round of our Young Scholars Seminar series. The link will be put up on the chat box. I humbly encourage you to take a look. Our research has contributed towards devising unique methodologies to arrive at a concrete understanding of the complex reality of rural India, including household incomes, structural inequalities, and informal labor relations. In the course of these 20 years of our journey, we have supported numerous research scholars in shaping their research who are now engaged in teaching and research in different institutions across India and abroad. With this brief introduction to FAS, let me now call upon the moderator for today's webinar, Abhinav Sood. Abhinav is a young research collaborator of FAS, a PhD fellow at the Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum. He worked with us to bring out a report on public spending on agriculture. Without further ado, I hand over the proceedings to Abhinav. Abhinav, over to you.
Thank you, Utkarsh. So, good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to this very important and very exciting topic to be discussed today on wage inequality in India. So, let me introduce this topic before we delve into the core research by Arindam. So, as we all know, like debates on inequality is very, has always been very prominent among academic debates, but more prominent particularly among developed countries for a long time. But on the other hand, the debates in developing countries were focused more towards poverty and welfare. But the experience of neoliberal era has led to a significant rise in the attention towards inequality, even among developing countries like India. So we are increasingly starting to understand the close linkages between rising inequality and slowdown in poverty eradication. So as a result, discussions around inequality have gained significant prominence even outside the academic circles. As we see today, even in general public discourse, it is gaining more prominence. There are several methodologies which exist relating to measuring inequality. But most of these researchers, they agree upon one conclusion that inequality has severely sharpened in India since the beginning of the liberalization process. So recently, studies by Oxfam International, as we know, and World Inequality Lab led by several scholars, including Professor Thomas Piketty and others. So these researchers have gained substantial public attention, and they highlight the historical levels of inequality in India, both in terms of wealth and income. These reports show that the concentration of wealth among the top 1% in India has surpassed the levels seen during colonial era. So such developments have drawn the focus back on the debates related to redistributive tax reforms, which is gaining more prominence, redistributive tax reforms in recent days. While such a sharp inequality in wealth highlights extremely uneven power structure in the economy, disparities in terms of wages is highly critical to understand in a country like India, as it has serious implications for poverty eradication and well being. Although wage earners constitute more than half of the total workforce in India, the spectrum of remuneration received by them is very wide. As India began to open up to the world, a small fraction of highly skilled workers quickly exploited and significantly benefited from the opportunities presented by the services boom and outsourcing of jobs from the Western world. But the large masses of casual and informal workers of India, they were left to struggle against the vulnerabilities imposed by the neoliberal growth pattern. Such a developmental path led to a sharp rise in wage inequality. But as the stream of this momentum weared off after the global financial crisis, it has it has had a myriad of impacts on workers in India. An important research by Professor John Dresch last year showed that, in contrast to the experiences of the first decade of this century, real wage rates of rural workers have remained completely stagnant over the past 10 years. Such a scenario is expected to have an adverse impact on poverty and welfare in India. So, in this scenario, it has become highly important to research and discuss the inequality in wages existing in India. Such an effort would have wide-ranging policy implications even outside the domain of welfare economics, including macroeconomic planning and development. So today's webinar will be focusing on this topic, and today Arindam will be presenting his research on the recent trends in wage inequality in India and how to understand them. So Arindam has been with the foundation since 2011 and is now the joint director of FAS. He also leads the PARI, Project on Agrarian Relations in India initiative of the FAS. He's pursuing his PhD in economics from BITS Pilani. Most importantly, he has been studying the question of wages and wage earnings in India for a long time. And I'm very happy that we have the opportunity to learn from his research today. And I also, before I hand it over to Arindam, I also like to thank FAS for giving us a chance to young scholars like me to learn a lot from experts such as Arindam. So thank you, and over to you, Arin.
Thank you, Abhinav. First, let me share my screen. Just hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. So, thank you, Abhinav, for the introduction. And let me begin with my today's discussion. Basically, I'll be presenting some trends of wage inequality in India over the last 4 decades using National Labor Force Survey data. Now, we know that since 1990s, Indian economy has witnessed a sharp rise in its GDP. The important question thus is whether the phase of acceleration in economic growth in the post-reform period has led to widening income inequality or not. A large and expanding literature has shown that consumption, income, and wealth inequality started rising in the post-reform period and worsened more recently. The explanation for increase in income inequality in the first decades of economic reform includes the agrarian distress between 1996-97 to 2004-5, stagnation in wages and earnings for the rural workers, jobless growth and job loss growth, both in the same time periods, and also return to the higher educations in the modern service sectors. There is a lack of consensus on wage inequality in the post-2011 period due to lack of data. We generally measure income inequality based on consumption expenditure data. Now, post 2011, we do not have consumption expenditure data. Government of India NSS survey in 2017-18, but they scrapped the data. They didn't release it. So the recent data which they have just published, fact sheet, also not available to us. Unit level data is not available to us. So therefore, we do not know the trends in or the changes in inequality after the 2011 periods. However, using the different sources, the recent work by the World Inequality Lab showed that income and wealth inequality increased sharply in the recent decades of the last decades or so. In this context, my work will contribute to ongoing debates over the dynamic of income inequality in the last few decades. To understand the change in income inequality in the recent period, we have used data on earnings from the nationally representative employment surveys, that is employment unemployment survey of NSSO and the new series of periodic labor force survey from 2011, 2017-18 to 2021-22. So I've roughly covered about 40 changes in wage inequality over the last four decades or so. Now, what I have used, as I mentioned, that I have used data use wage earnings data from the various round of employment, unemployment, and periodic labor force survey. 1983, 1993, this is basically covered pre-reform periods. 1993 and 2004-5, this data basically post-reform. 11-12, PLFS 2017-18 and 2022-23. Roughly it covered 40 years periods. The age what I have taken is basically 15 to 64 working age populations, and I have used casual workers and regular workers' wage earnings in urban and rural areas in India. The nominal wages deflated by the consumer price index for the agricultural laborer and by the consumer price index for the industrial workers for rural and urban areas respectively at 2011-12 prices. Now, there is an issue with the labor force employment the labor force survey data. The old series, that is employment and unemployment set data of 2000 prior to 2011-12 and also to 11-12, that provides data on wages of the all employed household members, but not income from the self-employed. Since self-employed comprises of most of the workers, half of the total workers, the wage inequality measures only a partial reflection of the level of inequality in income. But the new series, which periodic labor force survey data, provides wage earnings for the self-employment workers. I have checked whether there is any difference between if I take self-employed workers casual workers, salaried workers, and self-employed casual workers and salaried workers. I measured the Gini. It is coming very close, more or less same results. So the results are not very different, Gini at least, but still we have to be little cautious about it because the old series doesn't have data on the income for the self-employed or wages for the earnings for the self-employed workers. For the long-term trends, what I have used the workers who are engaged in the regular and casual employment in India over the last 4 decades. Now, what the trends is showing in India for that from 1983 to 21-22. Now, 22-23 data is available, but due to some issues like there is a changes in occupation classification, then we have to again reclassify the occupation. That is why I didn't use the data for these presentations. So roughly from 1983 to 2021-22 data I have used for the trends analysis. The measure there, as Abhinav already mentioned, there's number of ways you can measure the inequality. But for the simplification, I have taken only 2 measures. One is dispersion ratios or percentile ratios and the Gini coefficient. So first what we have done, we have calculated the 3 indicators to compare low and high income earners, that is percentile 90 and percentile 10, and 2 extreme with the middle wage earning groups, that is percentage 50 by 10, percentile 50 by percentile 10, and percentile 90 by percentile 50. What the trend is showing, very clear pattern is coming from the data, showing that after the post-liberalization periods from 1993 to 2004-5, the wage inequality for the top earners, basically the ratio of top to bottom earners has increased, and from 2004 to 2005, there is more or less not much increase, more or less stable or marginal decline. And from 2004-5, 2011-12 to 2022-23, the top to bottom earnings groups wage, the ratio has fell quite sharply. Same thing for the P90 by P10, 50 ratios also. There's an increase in the post-liberalization period, and from 2011-12 to 2022, there's a fall in wage inequality. Now, this is the overall distributions. Now, what I have done, because this wage inequality also very important, the distributions are slightly different for the salaried workers. So I've calculated the same ratios for urban salaried and rural salaried. Urban salaried workers, the percentile ratio showing very clear patterns. Same, the post-liberalization period, there is a rise in inequality, first decade of liberalization reform periods. After that, there is some sort of a stagnation, moderate changes. And from 2011 onwards, there is a fall in inequality, wage inequality. Rural areas for the salaried workers, slightly different. Increased till 2004, there's a sharp fall in 7-8, and increase in 2011-12, and then there's a fall in wage inequality. Now, I have taken another measure, that is Gini coefficient, which is commonly used to measure the inequality. In contrast to the wage dispersion ratio, what Gini coefficient does is basically does not measure the inequality in 2 points. Percentile 90 divided by percentile 10, that ratio they look. What Gini coefficient does basically, it takes into account the entire range of the distributions. So equal distribution means the Gini coefficient is 0, while the unequal distribution means that Gini coefficient is 1. Now, what Gini coefficient showing over the last 4 decades? Very similar pattern of what we have observed in the percentile or the dispersion ratios. Gini for the urban areas increased quite sharply, and urban sharply in the post reform periods, but it continued till 2011-12 period. And from 2011-12 onwards, there is a fall in the inequality in the urban areas. There is a decline till 1993, then slight increase from 1993 to 2004-5, and then 2004-5 onwards, there is a fall in inequality. This could be the reason because of the high wage growth in the rural areas for the casual workers in between 2004 to 2011-12 period, and it has been discussed quite widely. But this is for the rural urban. Now, one other features in this striking features, what is coming out that the inequality in urban areas higher than the rural areas. So this is another feature that is coming. Now, what I have looked at is basically also calculated Gini for regular workers, casual workers, and Gini for all workers. Gini for rural regular workers increased from 1993 to 2004-5 period, and there is a fall. But casual workers, it's very interesting pattern coming from beginning 1983 onward. There is a fall, the systematic fall in the inequality. Overall, what happened? Gini inequality increased from 2000 from 19 in the post-liberalization period, and then there is a decline from 2004-5 onwards. Further, what I have calculated is a Gini coefficient for the regular workers by gender and in our rural areas and urban areas. Rural areas and urban areas for the regular workers. There's no systematic pattern which what it is visible here. We do not find any systematic pattern, but it clearly shows there's some sort of a increase in the inequality in the post-reform period. But in rural areas, for the casual workers, what we have observed that there is this fall in inequality among the male casual workers and the female casual workers. And what we have also observed that post 2004 period, the inequality, fall in inequality for the casual workers, both in male and female, is quite sharp. The reason from 2004 and 5 to 2011 could be definitely one reason is basically rise in the sharp increase in rural wages for the casual workers, and also MG and NHG played a very important role for this fall in wage inequality. Now, the ratio of what happened, a calculated ratio of the casual to the regular workers, it is showing that after 2004-5, the casual wages, the ratio has improved. So, or we can say that wage gap between the casual workers and regular workers has been narrowed. Now, I have estimated this pattern from the periodic labor force survey data and employment unemployment survey data, and it's showing a clear pattern that wage inequality after 2011-12, there is a fall in wage inequality after 2011-12 period, which is slightly different pattern what we have observed in the recent debates. Like there's this discussion that wage inequality, economic inequality, income and wealth are rising, are increasing rapidly. Now, to judge these changes, what I have looked at is basically, I have used that labor income share, which is available in the RBI website. I've taken the data from the RBI website. What labor income share measure is basically distribution of income between the factor production, that is labor and capital. Any decline in the share of income indicates the decline labor share of income indicates that the income from capital, that is profit and rent, outpaces compensation toward the labor. And this implies that income is concentrated in the richer hands, which in turns increasing inequality. Now, what happened in this graph clearly showing that this fall in the labor income share started before the reform periods, started somewhere in the early phase of the liberal reform periods, like 80s, mid of 80s, fell quite sharply after the liberalization, basically from 1997 to 2007-8, and there is a sharp improvement or increase in labor share income between 2007 to 2011, which is exactly fit with what we are discussing, the changes in wage inequality over the time, at least till 2011-12 periods. But what happened after 2011 period? There's a fall showing the labor force survey, but the labor income share also shows some sort of improvement after 2011-12 period, particularly improved 2016-17, 15-16. So that means the inequality has fallen. But why it is happening? There's a discussion that there's a rise in inequality in every spectrum, every aspect, but why it is happening, why it is showing in the labor wage data. This what I have taken at discuss. So I discuss in two ways basically. First is why wage inequality increased after post-liberalization periods from 1993 to 2004-5 period, and then why it is moderate between 2004 to 2011, and then why fall in the wage inequality after 2011 period. Now there's a discussion, there's a theoretical discussion in India in the literature that some sort of a economic liberalization, globalization will lead to decrease in inequality in developing countries. Basically, trade theory model predict that the economy opens up to the trade. It would be associated with increasing demand for the less skilled workers and plentiful to the low income economies. But or we can say that it is expected that increase in investment rate and output and more and better employment opportunity would emerge, and the labor mobility would increase, leading to narrow down the horizontal wage differences among the workers with the similar skills and in the same type of jobs. But this didn't happen in India. What actually happened in the post-reform period is basically commonly we refer to as skill enhancing trade. This basically trade liberalization led to a increased demand for the skilled workers, and therefore there is a wage differential between the skilled and the unskilled wage labor. The other hypothesis also discussed is basically skill-based technologies after post-liberalization period, and also the quality upgradation of the firms, basically in machines implementation. And third is basically the job polarization or U-shape hypothesis, which is basically the automation of outsourcing of routine tasks, basically kind of clerical jobs. This actually triggered the inequality, and after the reform periods, and then that is what happened. But actually, what happened that here we have discussed. Now, first I looked at the literature, what literature discussed in relation to wage inequality. In the literature, it's clearly pointed out that inequality started increasing in the early phase of economic reforms and intensified in the first decade of economic reform, which is quite similar to my results. But this was why this happened is largely due to the rapid growth of the wages for the skilled, regular or salaried workers. The explanation put forward for the rapid rise in wage inequality overall in urban areas, particularly between 1993-94 to 2004-5, include return to the tertiary education, skill-based technologies, and mismatches between the supply and demands of the skilled workers. Between 2004-5, what in the literature discussed that it could be the fall in or the moderate increase in inequalities largely due to the rapid rise in the unskilled wages or casual worker wages. In fact, in between 2004 to 2004-5 to 2011-12, real wages increased sharply by more than 6% per annum for the casual workers in rural and urban areas both. This has been quite discussed. We have examined this point by Professor Usami. It's published in the Review of Agrarian Studies, and quite shows that there's a rise in wage inequality in between 2004-5 to 11-12, and that could be the reason for the moderate increase or say slight decline of the wage inequality between 2004 to 2011-12. The reason be basically the supply side factors like overall education improvement, fall in female labor supply, demand side factors such as growth in unskilled intensive sectors like constructions, public employment guarantee program has been the major drivers of these trends. Now, in the few slides, what we have examined is basically why the wage inequality fell in the recent decades from 2011 to 2011, 21, 22. And we compared with the previous period with different factors. Now, the fall in real wages, the fall in the inequality was largely due to the fall in real wages in the recent decades. Now, the interesting pattern what is coming out from the graph is basically this is annual average growth rate for regular and casual workers in India between 1983 to 2022-23. Sorry, 21-22. Sorry, this is a mistake. 21-22. Now, we can easily categorize or sub-period between these entire periods. And what it is showing that in the recent period, the real wages for the casual workers is stagnant, is growing at roughly about 2 to 3% per annum according to the periodic layer 4 survey data. Whereas there is a complete collapse of decline in the salaried wage workers. So it's basically what happened is basically fall in inequality is largely due to the flattening effect, downward flattening effect, where the income for the top deciles increased much lesser than the lower deciles. But actually what happened in India is basically there's a collapse of the salaried workers completely between 2011-12 to 2021-22. There's a negative growth. We haven't seen this kind of growth earlier period from 1983 to 2004 periods. But what happened? Why the wage inequality increased between 1993 to 2004-5 periods, or we can say 1983 to 1993 periods, is largely due to the growth in the regular wages. The growth of regular workers' wages was higher than the casual worker wages. That is why the wage inequality increased. But this phenomena, the recent phenomena, which is quite stark, and it's basically we have to be cautious saying that it is okay with saying that inequality is falling or not. That's we have to be little careful of saying that inequality is falling because of these trends: fall in the wages or stagnation of the wages for the rural casual workers and fall in wages for the regular workers in India. Now, I have calculated growth for different sub-period for regular workers and casual workers. It clearly shows that the recent period there is a complete stagnation. Now, what happened between 2021 and 22? There's some sort of a spark or rise in the wages for the casual workers, but this phenomena is requires some sort of investigation, because this quite like that after the COVID, there is a rise in the wages from the what is periodic layer 4 surveys report. Now, to examine this point, whether there is a stagnation in wages in the rural areas or not, we have used another data source, that is Labour Bureau's data, wage rates in rural India data. And this data is clearly showing that there is a stagnation in rural wages in the recent periods. And these stagnations, if you look at we have calculated growth in the different time periods. This is published in the Review of Agrarian Studies Journal, and it is clearly showing that real wages between 2014 to 2022-23 grew at the less than 1% per annum. If you take 21-22, 2021 or 21-22 data, the real wages did not increase. So periodic layer 4 data is quite suspicious in that sense. Why it is increasing, we do not have much clue about it. We have to re-examine this point. But what happened? This wage growth, fall in wage growth, is basically a factor for the decline in wage inequality in India. The second point which I have examined here is basically U-shaped pattern of wage growth or polarization of wage structure. Now, what I have done is I calculated the wage for each percentile and compared with the previous periods. So the four time sub periods, 1983 to 2004-5, 2004-5 to 2011-12, and 2011-12 to 2017-18, and 2017-18 to 2021-22. So basically for 5 periods. What we have seen that in the first decade, like 1983 to 1993-94, the wage growth this is for the regular workers, because casual workers more or less the growth, there's no some sort of a fluctuation. There's some sort of a bipolar or bimodal distributions, what we have found. But regular workers' wage growth for each percentage is quite strong. From 1983 to 1994, 93-94, wage growth happened for each quantiles. There's equal distribution of wages, more or less growth in wages. So therefore, this pattern shows that this could be the reason for some sort of a stagnant or moderate rise in the wage inequality between 1983 to 1993-94. But what happened in the post-liberalization, post-reform period, particularly between 1993 to 2004-5 period, we see some sort of a U-shaped curve, both in urban and rural areas. Clearly shows that the wage for the middle wage workers distributions has fell quite sharply. It increased sharply for the top decile, top percentiles groups from the above the median wage groups, and this is quite stark in the urban areas. If you look at the urban areas graph, what happened that this is quite sharp for the top decile wages is increased quite sharply than in compared to the rural areas. But in the period, so 1993, 1994 to 2004-5, we see some sort of a U-shaped curve. But 2004-5 to 2011-12, there's a moderation. It's not as sharp as stark as in between 1993 to 2004-5. But what happened from 2011 to 12 to 2021-22? I've compared these two periods separately, sub-periods separately, and it's showing that the wages for the top decile workers collapsed completely, and it declined by more than 4 to 5%. That could be the reason for the fall in the wage inequality. Now we have to think about it whether this is good for the economy or not. Now, next slides, what we have estimated is the growth of wages for the different occupations group. Now, 1993 to 2004-5, there is a high. So first three division is basically division 1 to 3 is skilled workers. Then it's basically the top managerial workers, first two divisions, and the lowest 9 is basically the elementary occupations. Now, 1993 to 2004-5, what we have observed, the growth for the legislator, senior official, and manager increased quite sharply. If you look at the lower distribution of the wage occupation groups, it didn't increase, it less than 1% per annum. But it changed completely between 2004-5 to 11-12 periods. It increased quite sharply for the elementary occupations. That is why the wage inequality has changed between these two periods. Rise in inequality from 1993-94 to 2004-5. Now, what happened after 2011 is basically there is a complete collapse of the wages or the fall in wages for the top managerial levels, like legislators, senior officials, and managers, professionals. They declined by 6% per annum. Whereas in post 2017-18 to 2021-22, it didn't decline further, but it still is a negative growth. But whereas lowest occupations group, there's elementary occupation, there is some sort of a growth, like 3% per annum, but it is stagnant. Still, at this point, I'm re-emphasizing that this is the inequality fall is basically due to the collapse of wages of the top occupation groups. Now, this is the ratio between the division 1, that is managerial workers, divided by elementary workers. What it is showing that ratio has sharply fallen. And now the ratio is basically for the elementary workers is only 4%. That also put a question that whether this is possible or not. Only 4 times higher than the elementary workers for managerial group. This is a question mark. Whether PLFS is collecting the top managerial workers, CEOs, they have surveyed for that top occupations groups. That is again is a question. Anyway, the national statistics, particularly NSSO, always underestimates the wealthy peoples in their samples that already been established. I think this point again re-establishing this figure again re-establishing the same thing. Now the question of education premium. Clear for the salaried worker, it shows that in the post-liberalization period, there's some sort of education premium or the skill premium. The wages for the graduate workers, the ratio, this is the ratio of other education level to illiterate, has actually increased from in between the post reform period from 1993 2004-5. In 17 after 2011-12, there's a fall, slight fall. Why this is so? Again, I have calculated growth for the regular wage workers by the different education level. Clearly shows that the real wages for the in urban areas, particularly for graduate workers and above, actually fell by 3% per month. And for in rural areas, it is 1.6% per month decline. Same features, same thing, same pattern is basically between 2017-18 to 2021-22. Clearly showing that inequality is basically due to the collapsed wages of the tertiary sector, tertiary educated workers. Further, I have calculated the wage ratios for this what my last slide is basically across the education groups. This is within the education groups. Whether there is a what we have discussed last time in the wage growth curve, some sort of a U-shape. If the wage share for the within the education group is rising, that means there's some sort of a U-shaped curve of the wages. What we have observed that in the graduates also, graduate secondary, higher secondary graduate workers, within the education groups, there is a the ratio has increased from in between 1993 to 2004-5. Again, similar thing is coming out that wage is basically some sort of a U-shaped curve, U-shaped wage growth curve that we have observed in the wage growth incidence curve. Similar feature for the casual workers, but the ratio is very, very small. So I'm not going to discuss these points. But what are the factors actually contributing to the wage inequality? Now, there are various methods that we can actually examine this point. But what I have used is the regression-based decomposition techniques developed by the field. So field decomposition enable us to answer two questions: how much inequality in earnings can account by the various worker characteristics, and to what extent do these characteristics account for changes in wage inequality over the time. Now, for that, there are 3 steps that we have to do. First step is basically simple regression equation. And with I regress the per day wage earnings on the various individual characteristics, taken dummies, wage square, dummies of gender, dummies of the variable of educations, dummies for industry, occupations. So state also we have control states, and also we have control dummies for whether the person is belonging to the scheduled caste or scheduled tribes. This is a regression equation. I'm not going to show this slide. What is important, what is coming out basically from this graph is basically there is a fall in education premium after 2004-5 periods, 2004-5 period, but sharp fall after 2011-12 period. This is basically coefficient of the regression of each education groups. And what we have seen, this graph clearly showing that the graduate workers, the education premium has been. This could be due to the fact that there's a growing unemployment, underemployment among the graduate workers, casualization of the workforce, and also open unemployment. The recent period, there is a collapse in employment. The unemployment rate is rising quite fast, and most importantly, that educated workers' unemployment rate increased quite rapidly in the recent period. That is, Center for Sustainable Employment recent work shows the same thing. So basically, there's a supply of labor for educated workforce, tertiary sector workers, but there is lack of work for the tertiary sector or tertiary educated groups. But between 1993 to 2004-5, it is basically this education premium was an important factor for the rising inequality, and that is why the wages for the regular workers and the graduate workers increased quite sharply between 1993 to 2004-5. It is basically changes in technological bias, changes, and other factors also. Now, what are the factors actually contributing to this wage inequality over the time periods? Clearly showing that education is the important factors for the wage inequality changes, and it still is an important factor for the changes in inequality. So in inequality. And other factors which is also important is basically occupation and industry. Now, so this is basically clearly shows that why the wages for the regular and salaried casual workers has completely stagnant or collapsed or declined in the last decades is basically there's a job loss growth between 2011-12 to 2020-17-18. Also, the open unemployment is rising. If you look at the employment growth in the recent periods, particularly there's a total employment, there's a fall in employment between 2011 to 17-18, and sectors which should provide the jobs, particularly service sector and the manufacturing sector, are not generating jobs for the educated workers. See, service sector is growing roughly about 9%, say 6 to 7% per annum, even now, but producing only generating few jobs. So therefore, the educated workforce who are looking for jobs are not getting jobs because of the demand and supply mismatches, and that is why there's a collapse in wages for the regular workers. There's a improvement between 2017 to 22-23, but it is mainly coming from agriculture and construction sectors. So manufacturing service sector, still the growth rate is quite low. Now, to understand the changes in inequality over the time periods, what we have taken is basically we have calculated this Gini component share, changes in the Gini component share over the 2 time periods. So basically, the share of each component multiplied by the Gini of the current year minus share of each component of the previous year multiplied by Gini divided by Gini of the current period minus Gini of the previous period. What it is showing is basically the increase in wage inequality between 1993 to 2004-5 was largely due to the education. So education premiums was a major factors for the changes in wage inequality. But that was not the case between 2004-5 to 2011-12. It was largely because of growth in industry. Basically, the increase in casual worker wages in construction and agriculture increased quite rapidly in these periods. That could be the reason the changes in wage inequality between 2004 to 2011-12. But the fall in wage inequality further is basically due to the education. 26% is explained by the education. So therefore, education has played a very important role for the changes in inequality in each, whether it is increase in inequality or decline in inequality, is education and supply and demand mismatches basically is mainly played an important role for the changes in overall inequality, wage inequality in India. Now, the question is that this fall in wage inequality is correct or not. Now, I have already, it has been discussed well that inequality is in Indian databases, particularly NSS, count the richer section of the people or the wealthy households. It is true for PLFS level, PLFS survey. 2021-22 data, we have looked at it, the sample salaried workers, the highest salaried workers sample, and it's showing that the highest wage earnings or monthly wages or income for the salaried workers was in the sample is basically 240,000 or 250,000. So definitely it shows that they undercount or under the sample the richest, but particularly managerial CEOs. Now this data I have collated from Ritika Khera and Meghna Yadav's paper. I was trying to correlate. This data they have used data for 2019-20 data. And what it is showing is basically the highest paid employers of the Nifty 50 companies within the Nifty 50 companies, the ratio of the highest paid employee divided by the median wages. And it is clearly showing the pay ratio is basically, for example, Hero Motors is 572 times. Okay, and the remuneration is 84 crores. So this, and for the different companies also, it is showing the same thing. So clearly showing there is a concentration of wealth and income for the richest household, which undercount in the sample. Now this clearly shows that there is a median salaries versus is very, very high. But in the theoretic level of survey showing completely different pictures. It's basically only 4 times, like 4 ratio is 4 or 3.5. So it's clearly showing that underestimates income. It's not that there's inequality is not rising. But what happened, this inequality is fall in inequality was largely, inequality is rising, but this data is it's not able to provide this information. But what is coming out from this analysis is basically the fall in inequality is largely due to the collapse in the wages for the regular workers, which is also, we have to think about whether it is good for the economy or not, because this inequality, we do not know whether it is, this is what we are expecting from the this is what I feel so. So this is what I have examined using this, a very preliminary analysis. I've been working on this paper to understand why inequality is falling. More or less, this picture is coming out, require rigorous examination of the fall in wage inequality in the recent periods and why the salaried worker wages collapsed in the recent periods. So that required more works, but the general trend is showing same between there's a rise in inequality between 1993 to 2004-5, more or less stable, or urban areas there is some sort of a rise in inequality. But 4 to 2011, there is a slight reduction in the rural areas, largely due to the implementation of MGNRG or wage growth in the casual sectors. But after 2011-12 period, there's a fall in wage inequality, both for the casual and regular workers. And this was largely due to the supply side factors, maybe the improvement in overall educations, overall education, and also demand side factor like jobless growth, actually the major driver for these trends. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Utkarsh. It was a very, very deep and very, very educative presentation. Thank you. So I hope we can move to question answer sessions right now. Before we open the questions to the floor, I have a couple of questions for you. I hope you will not mind taking those. I just wanted to, I mean, as you mentioned, there could be a very good reason for this fall in inequality because of the fall in wages of regular workers. So, and you also mentioned about casualization aspect. I was wondering whether such a casualization can be seen from the data, in the sense the various divisions of workers mentioned and various occupations of workers mentioned. The share of, what is the share of regular workers to casual workers in each of these divisions and workers. So that is the question I wanted to ask. If we can discuss that, and we can move to the questions from the floor.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, you can calculate the casual workers. Like from 1999 onwards, we have data that's whether they engaged in which type of industry and all. So from that data, we can easily calculate the share of the casual workers among the salaried workers. Yes, that we can do it. Yes.
Okay. So moving on to the questions from the participants. So there is one question on the contradiction between Labor Bureau and Employment Unemployment Survey. Do you think this is because the Labor Bureau is only capturing a subset of rural casual wage work?
So I didn't get it. Can you repeat one more?
So the question is on the contradiction between Labor Bureau and Employment Unemployment Survey.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you think this contradiction is because Labor Bureau is only capturing a subset of rural casual wage work?
Oh, that's slightly difficult question. Okay. See, the difference between two data sets is basically wage rates and earnings. Okay, the rural in Labor Bureau, what they ask is basically ask rural wage rates. Okay, they will go to the village, they have sample of 600 villages, 603 villages. And the villages, they will go and they will ask what is the wage rate, prevailing wage rates in the village. Whereas the casual, for the NSS surveys, they ask wages, wage received by the workers. So it's a receiver sides where other side is basically they ask and go and ask what is the prevailing wages in the village. So that is there's a definitional issues, of course, but there's this why the stark differences, whether what the factor basically reason for this kind of differences, and quite start that wage certainly increased by, see, if you look at 2021 to 21-22, which I and Professor Usami examined in review of agrarian studies paper, showing that this wage increase from 2021 to 21-22 is roughly about 9%, whereas labor bureau data showing less than 1%. We have also cross-checked with the agricultural wages data. Okay, agricultural wage data also giving similar sort of analysis. So this real questions of why there's a sharp rise in wages for the casual workers from the employment unemployment survey or the predictive labor force survey that require investigations, but we do not have a clear answer as of now.
I think the next question is also somewhat related. So on the stagnation of salaried work, do you think some of this is happening because people who were previously captured under casual wage work are now categorized as salaried work, perhaps through third party or outsourcing? So the question is whether earlier people who were captured under casual work are now captured under salaried work, regular work. The question is that.
I don't think so. That kind of methodological change didn't happen in predictive labor force survey.
Okay. And
And
one
that's
more
not
question.
possible also methodologically.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
you can't comment on it.
Yeah. So one more question is related to, I think, what we discussed. Can we say the increase in casual jobs wages is due to increase in casual workers, like workers involved in gig economy?
Sorry, can you repeat one more time?
So the increase in casual job wages, increase in casual job wages is due to increase in casual workers itself. The number of workers itself has increased a lot. Is it due to that?
I don't have answer for this. I haven't seen this. I don't have answer.
Okay. Okay. So let me quickly go through some more questions. So there is one question on the methodology aspect. So which methodology do you think is best fit to map unequal wages, if not inequality as a whole in India? Do you feel the methodology followed by Niti Aayog is robust?
This I haven't seen the Niti Aayog methodology, but certainly we need proper data. Okay. Whatever we are calculating inequality based on the different sources, even from the consumption expenditure fact sheets, it may not be correct. Okay, because we do not have a data at the household level, we do not have data at the individual levels. So the calculations, you can see the changes in incomes or consumption expenditure by decile, because that is what are available with us, the changes. But inequality measuring inequality from this data is quite difficult. And I am not aware of how the Niti Aayog is calculating inequality. The difference. But I am aware of this the recent work by the World Inequality Lab. They are doing some sort of they have a different methodology. But except see we can the changes in economic inequality, particularly wealth inequality, we can measure in the post-11 period using the that All India Debt and Investment Survey. But otherwise it's slightly difficult.
Okay, I think these are some of the important questions. One second, I'll see if there are more. So this is again like a related question, I guess. So even though the share of casual workers in total workforce is relatively higher than regular workers, then how is wage inequality among regular workers contributing more to overall wage inequality? So even though the share of casual workers is higher in the workforce,
Yeah.
but the wages of the regular workers is contributing to the wage inequality more. How is
Yeah.
that the case? That's the question. Like, can you just explain the?
Let me think about it, because this is what is a slightly methodological question. Okay. Yeah. I have to think about it this way.
Yeah.
Maybe I can come back later, if you have other question.
Okay. We'll come back to this question. One question we have is on how are earnings data obtained for casual workers? I think it's a methodological question. Like, I think you could
Earnings data obtained from
for
the
casual workers obtained.
casual crop obtained from where? Like, if it is periodic labor force survey, it is simple. If you take weekly in the periodic labor force survey, it is the wages data is available daily basis. You can calculate up to a weekly basis, and then you divide by the number of days worked. That's all. That is how we can either you can calculate wages for weekly or daily basis. That's how we calculate the wage earnings for the casual workers. For the salary worker, they changed the methodology. Now they are collecting data on a monthly basis from 2017 onward. Earlier it was weekly basis. So there is the changes in the methodology.
Sorry to interject. Some participants have raised hands. Maybe if time permits, Abhinav, if you can allow them.
Sure. We can look into that as well. Like, say, this only one question. We'll take it from here and then move to the participants asking questions directly. So, this one question is related to: can we say wage inequality in India is main hurdle for its economic development? It's a broader question. Or policy initiatives related to wage inequality are not successful. Like, it's a very general, broad question.
That's true. That's very, very true. Policy is very important. See, the minimum wages policy is very important for the changes in the redistribution of wages. Basically, if you implement minimum wages properly, then definitely the lower status income increased. But we do not have mechanism. We have minimum wages policies, but that's not practical. Like, it's not implemented properly. So even if there's a effective wage policy, definitely the inequality should fall, and that has failed because, see, from 2007-8 to 2011-12 period, if you look at the fall in inequalities, largely because of MG energy. And MG energy wages were paid. It was the wages that paid the agricultural minimum wages. Okay, so the workers are getting higher wages than the market wage because minimum wages that time was quite high, and it was revision was happening quite regularly. Now, because there is no implementation policy, it's not revised. Last 10 years, there's no revision of minimum wages. So revision of minimum wages, implementation of minimum wages, okay, will have an impact on the wage inequality. So wage policy is very important.
Yeah, great. So let's go to questions from the audience if you are okay with it. So let me ask the people who have raised the hand, like Judith here, Dr. Judith here. I think. Hope we can. The host can unmute. Yeah, please go ahead and ask your questions, please.
Can I ask my question now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We are able to hear.
Okay. Firstly, Arindam, I think that was a fantastically interesting presentation and very clear. Thank you for doing it so clearly, because it's actually all very complex. I think that the two things that I would have liked much more strongly underneath this are, firstly, the changes in overall employment. I mean, how far employment and unemployment are behind this whole story. And the second question is back to the question I was asking about earnings data. In earnings for casual labour in rural areas, certainly, probably in urban areas as well, it's quite hard to get reliable information on numbers of days worked. And I wonder if you think that this is a major problem or not.
The second question, I don't think so. There is a problem. What the PLFS or the National Sample Survey they does is basically they go and collect data on wages and employment, weekly employment basically, based on the previous week, like the day of survey, previous week, how many days they work and what is the wages. So it's not that recall for a year or so, something like that. It is basically the previous week. So that is not a major concern for the wage data, as far as I understood from the methodology.
What about seasonality? Seasonality in rural areas?
Seasonality, it captures because they visit 4 times in a year. So
Okay.
that way they capture it, yes.
Okay.
Not same employee, same workers, but the different workers, same type of worker, but they visit 4 times in a year.
Thank you.
Yeah, second question, of course, the employment is an important factor, overall changes. This is employment between 2004-5 to 2011-12. If you look at the data, it's not that overall employment was rising. Growth was less than 1% at least per annum. But what has happened during that period is basically the growth in employment in construction sector, which actually a factor for the rise in wages for the casual workers. But what happened after 2011? There's no growth. Particularly 14 to 17 Labor Bureau employment data clearly shows there is a fall in employment in the construction sectors. And it continued till 2017-18. There is a slight improvement in the recent years. Definitely that has an impact on the overall wage growth or pattern of inequality in India. Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So for next participant, Mr. Krishna Kumar, can you, have raised his hand? Like, please go ahead with your questions.
Okay. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening. My question is completely based upon your statement of jobless growth and job loss growth. Particularly, I want to ask the kind of buzz or rumors in the society about the AI involvement and inclusion in the society. Will AI, can be AI one of the reasons of increasing the wage inequality in society in upcoming time?
I don't know the answer upcoming time, but the recent time periods, like whatever data we have now, there's one paper. They have examined this question of the automations and mechanizations, whether that has impact on the job polarization or not. They didn't find any evidence. So at this time period, there's no evidence showing there is some sort of job polarization, but we do not know what will happen. But maybe there's some sort of changes. That is a very important factor because a lot of AI technology and other things, like for example, automations, many things has been happening. So that will definitely impact on the employment. So alternative sources of employment, for example, the sector which should generate the employment, say service sector or say service or the manufacturing sectors are not growing fast. Like it's more or less stagnant in the last decades, which should generate the employment. That is not generating. That's a big question. If that generates, maybe that problem, half of the problem you can solve with the job loss growth, like that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. One final participant, like Krishna Kumar has raised hand. Like Mr. Krishna Kumar.
I have
Yeah,
already asked about the. My question was complete. My question was about AI and wage inequality.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Kurian Matthew, please. Sorry, Mr. Kurian Matthew. Sir, please go ahead and ask your question, sir. Unmute. Host, please unmute.
Okay. Can you hear?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. At the outset, I congratulate Dr. Das for the magnificent presentation of a very interesting and relevant topic. I have one or two queries. One is from your survey or from your study, how did you come to know about the role of trade unions? Because in the presentation, I did not, maybe due to my deficit, I could not come across the role of trade unions in the nature of collective bargaining like that. So, what may be your view on that? Second, maybe a broad question, which you may answer or may not. You referred to the inequality lab of Paris School of Economics. Now, inequality is a global systemic issue. Therefore, there are people who legitimizes inequality in India by stating that this is, after all, a global issue. But I don't subscribe to that sort of a view. It is a people's life issue in our own country. If that is the case, what may be your resolution to this growing human problem? These are my two queries. Thank you very much.
The first question, both the question I do not have answer. Like I do not know. I haven't looked at it. Like I'm doing my research currently.
Sorry for it.
Answer, maybe I'll write to you.
Sorry for it. You know the difference because I am talking from Kerala.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't answer. I could not answer your question, but still I have to, both the thing I have to discuss. I have to think, I have to look at the evidences or another thing. I haven't looked at it, so I can't say something.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for that.
Okay. I think that was a very nice discussion, I think. So that was a great presentation, Arindam, and thanks for answering the questions of all the participants. So I think I'll hand it over to Utkarsh to finally conclude the session. Utkarsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhinav. I'll only take a couple of minutes to propose the vote of thanks. I would like to thank Arindam Das for his very informative presentation. We are grateful to Abhinav Surya for agreeing to moderate this session. I hope it was as enriching for him as it was for us. I'm thankful to the online team at FAS, Sandeepan, Tapas, Setu, for their role in conducting this seminar very smoothly. A special thanks to my colleagues, Sai and Nikita, for their valuable help in the social media efforts. Last but not the least, we are grateful to all the attendees for participating and making this a lively discussion. Given the importance of this topic, we have been running a social media series based on under the hashtag wages in rural India. This hashtag will appear in your chat box. You can always look them up if interested. You can find us on social media under at FAS Agri Studies on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I request that you follow us on these platforms to get updates about us, about our work. And as we mentioned before, the call for applications for the third round of Young Scholars online seminar series are out now. Find out the details from the link in the chat box. To know more about the foundation and the work we do, please visit our website, fas.org.in. We'll be ending this session with this. Once again, thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.